So good morning, everyone. We will start, and someone else will be joining online very soon from Raqqa. Thank you for coming to this side event on the last hour of this NDM. In this session, we will speak about the role of humanitarian mine action in supporting recovery efforts and the resilience of communities in Syria, but also the human and economic costs of unsafe recovery. Following the political transition, access has improved, return movements have increased. This is creating both opportunities and significant risks. Since December 2024, the beginning of the transition, more than 1.5 million refugees and nearly 2 million internally displaced people have returned to Syria and to their area of origins. Some had nothing left to return to. Some others came back to homes reduced to rubble. In other cases, the house was still standing, the shop remained, and the land was still there. But for many, the real question remained, is it safe to step inside? Is it safe to cultivate my land? And for millions of Syrians today, recovery begins with that question. Is it safe? So as we know, Syria is among the most contaminating countries in the world. Explosive ordnance contamination continues to claim lives, but it also silently blocks economic recovery, access to services, and safe returns. Syria is now entering a recovery phase. The government is actively working on the national recovery plan, and recovery simply cannot happen without humanitarian mine action. As it has been repeated in different side events that you probably attended, it's an enabler. It enables safe access to land and resources. It allows schools and hospitals to reopen. It supports returns and displacement communities, and it restores livelihood. And ultimately, it really creates the foundations on which all humanitarian and development efforts can succeed. So to discuss this today, our panel brings together actors working across policy, operations, and local leadership. We are joined by a diverse panel of mine action experts who will provide insights into current needs, opportunities, challenges, and required actions to ensure an effective role of humanitarian mine action and how it can effectively support Syria's recovery. So I'm happy to introduce you Mohamed Rashid. Mohamed Rashid is the Deputy Director of the Syrian National Mine Action Center that has been created in June 2025. As one of the founders of the White Helmets as well, a very well-known organization that was working mainly in the northwest Syria, he brings both operational and institutional experience and a national perspective on how mine action must evolve in this recovery phase. We also have in the panel Daniela Zizi. She's the Country Director for Humanity and Inclusion in Syria. Daniela is a specialist in international humanitarian law and brings more than 15 years of experience in the humanitarian sector. Previously, she served as a Country Director for Palestine and Lebanon. Jakub Walanda is working with the Danish Refugee Council. He is the head of humanitarian disarmament and peace building, including humanitarian mine action for DRC in Syria. He has a very extensive experience in disarmament, peace building, and security in displacement context across Latin America, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. And prior to this, he was working for the DRC as well in Ukraine, and therefore he brings comparative insights on large-scale contamination, displacement, and integrated responses. Finally, we have online, or we will have online, hopefully, very soon, Ibrahim Chernabi Massoud. He is the Executive Director of Safe Land, and he's supposed to join us today online from Raqqa. Safe Land is a Syrian-led organization established in 2023 by local mine action professionals. He previously worked with international organizations such as HAMAP and also Tetra Tech, and Ibrahim will share the local perspective on risk, access, and national capacity. So together this panel reflects national leadership, international expertise, and local action, all critical for Syria's recovery. And with that, let's begin the conversation not just about clearing explosives, but also enabling safe futures. As we heard yesterday in the side events of Syria, the scale of casualties is significant, with more than 2,100 people affected since December 2024. And behind these numbers are individuals, families, communities. Humanitarian Inclusion has been working in Syria for many, many years through a very strong victim assistance and recovery lens. So maybe, Daniela, in your view, what are the costs of explosive ordnance to individuals, communities, and what's the state of victim assistance in Syria at the moment?
Thank you, Liz, and good morning, everyone. I think this is a very interesting question and that can be taken from different lenses. As you mentioned also, the scale of returnees is quite impressive, and that also is what is creating an additional layer and an additional level and adding numbers to the casualties that we are seeing in Syria. Syria has more than 5 million internally displaced people at the moment still. It is foreseen that more than 1 million people will return actually from abroad as well in 2026. That increases the risks, but it's not just the risks on stepping out, but also increases the risks of Syria not being able to support survivors, and therefore deploying actually victim assistance to the scales that it should be deployed. This is not an abstract concept. I mean, we met as HI, and I met also personally many families that actually are in that situation. I will bring you some examples just to contextualize a little bit what it means for a family or for an individual to be a survivor of explosive ordnance. I met a family in Deir ez-Zor that were displaced for 6 years before being able to return into their own home. Their own home was standing, actually, so that it was a striking moment, and they were quite happy to be able to restart a life where they came from. 2 days after their return, they discovered that actually their backyard was full of items. And they had to basically confine all children inside the house until a actor could actually clear out the area. But that means that they jump from a situation of sort of confinement, of at least distressing situation from a camp, into being prisoners in their own house to avoid the risks. And there is also the same situation that happened to a family in northern Hama. They were actually returning as well. Their own community, their own village was dishabitated and not inhabited for at least 3 years prior they started to return. Soon after their return, 2 incidents occurred. In one of these incidents, the son of the family that I met lost his leg. The point is that he survived. He is a survivor. But this child has no enabling system around him. They were able, of course, to save his life and to stabilize him, but there is the continuum of care that is absolutely absent around him. And when we talk about continuity of care, we talk about the fact that he's also unable to return to school as a first. He's unable to cope with the pain that, of course, accompany to be a survivor. And this is not something that is also linked to the individual per se, that of course has this right, but it also has effects throughout the entire family, because an unaddressed and untreated psychological trauma that affects the entire family as consequence, it distresses, it breaks the family, because the family sees itself unable to support the survivor, while the survivor is mostly prone to depression, if not duly supported. On top of that, is usually mothers that absorb that, especially when it comes to children. When it comes to children of our husbands or even family members, mothers, sisters, they become caregivers. Even they were not planning to, but they become caregiver. And that means that all their energy, their lives, is absorbed by one individual. Is absorbed by one individual, but not because they don't want it to do, but because the system, structurally speaking, is unable to support them in the task. Just to make also some numbers, In 2025, the MSNA of Syria actually recorded that women serve as primary caregivers in over 95% of Syria households, where caregivers are themselves displaced, injured, or killed. Persons with disability can be left entirely without support in the absence of a structured system that provides the due support. It ultimately results in a partial recovery. So the individual survives, but at the same time is unable to strive in life, is unable to, is a sort of like life freezes. If a child is unable to return to schools, is unable to complete his education or her education, if he is or her is unable to complete his education, then it means that ultimately in life he won't be able to support himself with a job. And it will be actually part of the household's responsibility to care also for the individual for the rest of his life, of her life. At the same time, when it is a father that actually loses a limb or that actually develops a permanent disability, it means that the family loses a breadwinner. The livelihood cannot complete it. And we know from success stories that this is not necessarily the case. Children, when are duly supported, they can return to school, they can strive in life, and they can continue. And they can continue their life. And the caregivers that are their mothers support the pattern, but they become not the sole responsible for it. At the same time, when a father or a mother loses a limb, or it is victim of accident and develop a permanent disability, life does not end. We have seen many instances when duly supported and with the due assistive devices of assistive technology that they can return to their own job. We have seen farmers that with adaptive tools, they were able to return to farm their land. So it is possible. The broader concept of VA is something that can really change the life of individuals and can return them to be part and members of the community. But there is also a broader impact on that. We are talking about on the impact on families, so on the smaller nucleus of life. But here there is also another element. When victim assistance doesn't work, and when I say victim assistance, I mean victim assistance from the health standpoint, but also to the broader concept, it means that the system in itself is stretched, because people that are not supported are more prone to develop infections. Relapses occur all the time. It means that they will be also part of the health system for the rest of their lives in different capacities, instead of having a continuum of care that it is assisted at home to physiotherapists that release the pain and that can simply be a supportive instrument of their life instead of being a predominant part of it. At the end of the day, ultimately, what I would like to say is that HMA is composed of 5 pillars. Each of these components, each of these pillars reinforce the others. Risk education generates community intelligence that improves survey. Survey guides clearance prioritization. At the same time, clearance creates the condition for return, creates the condition for resuming life. VA ensures that survivors are fully integrated in society and reinforce its resilience at the same time. Ultimately, also, VA informs survey and therefore clearance, because by profiling the individuals that are more prone to accident, we can understand where contamination is. If fathers are the most affected, we know that it is related to farming, to land. Where children are most affected, it means that there is a higher prevalence of contamination also around the playground, around schools. So each and every of these pillars serves the other, complement the others, and it is what makes the impact on the ground. It was what makes actually communities to be resilient, countries to restart. And I think that this is also maybe the last point that I want to make is that My in Action last year was supported only for 33% of the funds. It was the most underfunded sector of Syria. VA was at the bottom of already underfunded sector with very, very little and stretched capacity to respond. HI runs VA services, especially in the health sector. We have several individuals that we serve also with prostheses and orthotics. We have waiting lists that approximately 4,000 individuals. and we have no resources and no means to address all those needs alone. So it is also quite important that whenever we talk about HMA, we remember that each pillar is essential to maximize the impact. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela. It's very impactful to have like concrete examples of theirs of family, Hama family, and the human cost of the explosive ordnance is very striking and heartbreaking. I really also found very interesting what you said about the role of the mothers and the women in this tragedy and the partial recovery. You mentioned that, like, if the structure of victim assistance is not there yet. I think we pointed out yesterday as well that the victims are increasing. Like it's around like 25 to 30 casualties every week, which is immense. And explosive ordnance has an impact in all spheres of the society, really. It has an impact on economy, it has an impact on operations, as I was saying before. And maybe DRC, that has been working in Syria since 2008, across different recovery and humanitarian activities across 7 governorates, I believe. From your perspective, what is the current funding situation and impact on explosive ordnance in agriculture, but also what are the benefits of long-term funding streams on this sector?
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, and hello, everyone. Thanks for showing up to this event. And I think it's always very interesting to listen to Daniela, but also very heartbreaking, because obviously, even for professionals who are exposed to this context on a daily basis, it is still every day shocking to see and to hear about these figures and statistics and the human loss and suffering that explosive ordnance causes in Syria. I will not go into explaining the magnitude of the problem again. That's why I want to just basically focus a little bit more on figures and numbers related to funding and also livelihoods and agriculture. In 2022, according to the protection cluster at that time, only 7% of the mine action needs were covered. At that time, it was around $80 million. Now, you could say maybe this had to do with hesitance of donors to engage under the previous structures, governance structures in the country. However, then if you look at the numbers in 2024, and I think this was what Daniela was also referencing as well, you will see that only 13% of the needs of the Mine Action Center were covered. And this is obviously, around and after the collapse of the regime. In 2026 now, we have the Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan that has been published very recently with a lot of input by the Mine Action AOR and also the Mine Action community. And the needs are $75 million. I think from an operator perspective, without putting anybody on the spot, I think we all agree that we're far away from this target to be met. So there needs to be more investment and support in mine action. Now, when we talk about recovery in Syria, we often refer to livelihoods, infrastructure, and services. However, I think there's an even more basic question that needs to be asked before all that. So, is the land actually safe to use? Because where explosive ordnance remains, recovery is not possible. So just a couple of examples. In Syria, according to IOM and other data, 72% of communities rely on agriculture and livestock as their primary source of income. And according to the World Bank statistics, agriculture accounts for, in 2022 and 2023, agriculture accounted for 43% of the national GDP. So it's a central pillar to Syria's economy. At the same time, as we have heard in the AOR event yesterday, and Ida, the coordinator, has been saying this as well, based on INSO data, 60% of explosive ordnance incidents occur in agricultural and grazing areas. So the very land people depend on to survive is the most dangerous. So they're putting themselves in danger every single day. In one of our recent assessments that we did as DRC in rural Damascus, in Dara in the south of the country, in Hama in the center of the country, in Idlib, we were asking households about the situation, and we have found out that 64% of households reported that there are areas, and often those are their original workplaces, that these communities, these people no longer access due to the fear of contamination. And 70% of those areas are agricultural land. So whether those areas are actually contaminated or not, in a sense is secondary, but what is striking is that just the perception of risk alone leads to the avoidance of land, avoidance of markets, and avoidance of services. And this obviously results in underutilized assets, reduced economic activity, and distorted local markets, and income is lost. Now, when we look at daily routines and patterns of communities and families, according to our multi-sectoral needs assessment that recently was conducted, that includes protection, economic recovery, shelter, and mine action considerations, explosive ordnance poses hazards to all community members and affects family routines. So in several parts of Dara district, governorate in some districts of Dara, 1/3 of families report taking no longer routes to take their children to school to avoid suspected contamination. So this results on a very individual level, higher fuel costs, more time spent in transportation, and additional transport expenses for families and communities who are already struggling economically in Syria. And in some districts in Dara, 50% of respondents across 4 districts reported avoiding specific markets and shops due to suspected explosive ordnance access. So again here, explosive ordnance affects economic activity, market access, and household expenditure. Just another example that has to do with access to water. During our recent NTS visits, non-technical survey visits in rural Damascus, our teams identified explosive ordnance, unexploded ordnance scattered along and in a riverbed between 2 villages that you can see here on the picture. So you can see very clearly that there are a couple of projectiles sitting basically in the riverbed. Before the conflict, the river was used for irrigation, livestock, daily water access. Today, communities avoid it, which obviously leads to increased fuel costs because people are traveling further to get water. Additional time is spent, resources are spent. This reduces efficiency in agricultural activities. So this is why humanitarian mine action is not only a protection risk, it is an enabler of economic recovery. It enables access to land, rehabilitation of infrastructure, access to services, and functioning of markets. However, this potential, as we think, is not fully realized, and I think this was also mentioned quite prominently in yesterday's AOR event by all the partners and speakers. The scale of contamination in Syria is significant, and current clearance capacity does not match the scale. It's not because we don't want, we simply cannot because funding is not enough. So without increased, sustained, and predictable funding, this gap will continue to grow. Just some last figures on funding. We're talking a lot about short-term funding cycles, which many of us are basically subjected to, I would say. When it comes to capacity development of our own teams, we all, HI, DRC, MAC, HALO, we're all training our own staff for weeks and months. We deploy them, there is on-the-job training, there's a lot of mentoring, a lot of investment happening in our own staff. Short-term funding doesn't allow us to substantially work with the staff because at some point we might have to lay off that staff. Those capacities we have built will move to other sectors, and operational capacity is lost for the mine action sector in Syria. There's another point I wanted to make about innovation. The space for innovation is limited due to short-term and unclear funding modalities. According to a GSHD study on operational efficiency, clearing land can vary significantly. It can significantly vary across the globe from 37 cents per square meter cleared to up to $100 square meter cleared. So this variation over 270 times around depends obviously on terrain, environment, methodology, and everything. However, in the study, there is the context of Colombia, and those who are more savvy on Colombia and visited the site event yesterday will know this much better than me. But what I found striking in this paper of GSHD is that thanks to long-term funding that allowed the program to learn, adjust, adapt, and innovate, the costs per square meter cleared were dropped from $79 per square meter to $20 per square meter. So this is just an example to illustrate how important it is to have predictable, reliable, multi-year funding, especially for Syria. In Syria, we're adapting and learning as we go. There is no baseline study. NTS is still happening. We don't have clarity on the exact contamination. We don't have clarity on contamination patterns. So we need to be able to test assumptions, adjust prioritization, and refine methodologies and adapt based on new data that is constantly being collected. Two very last points, really. We're also working with National Mine Action Center, so thank you very much really for all the support and collaboration. We're very happy about this. We are working also on supporting with operational, organizational and strategic development of the Mine Action Center and the sector per se. However, building such systems that we're all together trying to build needs time. Short-term funding, unpredictable funding makes this very difficult. So as a conclusion, I think what is needed is an integrated area-based approach that really is based on evidence from NTS, where Mine Action NTS is really the core of identifying needs of communities. And then this has to be aligned with interventions such as clearance, livelihoods activities, wash, shelter, infrastructure rehabilitation. These are the things that we're doing as DRC, and we're seeing HMA really and NTS data as the core for basically integrated programming. Bringing me back to the example of the river, we can clear the river, remove the hazards, but only when this is combined with wash activities, water systems can be used again, and only when combined with livelihood support can agriculture production resume. So it's really, Mine Action needs to be embedded in the broader recovery framework and vice versa. The other sectors of the recovery framework need to integrate with Mine Action. So this is just really a pledge for integrated Mine Action with other sectors, multi-sectoral engagement and coordination, and the need for reliable, predictable, and multi-year funding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jakub, for bringing this comparison with Colombia and how we can replicate lessons learned from other contexts. I think it's very interesting to reflect on that. And also thank you for highlighting the impact of explosive ordnance on livelihood, which is one of the primary obstacles for returns according to some of our surveys. And really explaining like how explosive ordnance contamination and short-term funding is actually holding back recovery in Syria. We also see with your intervention that the fact that innovation is so much needed in Syria and time is needed in Syria as well to really build the National Mine Action Center, to really build the capacity of national staff that we have, and that could be enabled by predictable funding. To be able to strengthen this partnership is very relevant. So thank you so much for that. I would like to shift now to our next question and bring the critical perspective of local actors, NGOs on the ground. We have Ibrahim Sher Nabi Masoud, the Executive Director of Safe Lands Online. He is joining us from Raqqa. Masoud, you are one of the only national humanitarian mine action actor at the moment operating. It would be very valuable if we could. Do you hear us?
نعم أسمعكم.
Perfect. So it would be very valuable if you could please highlight the main challenges and the needs you perceive in the sector from the perspective of the local actor. And what does unsafe recovery really mean for communities whose livelihoods compel them to enter contaminated land, as Yakub was saying? So over to you, Masoud.
شكرا كثير لكم على إتاحة الفرصة لي. أصحاب السادة الزملاء الكرام، أشكركم جميعا على إتاحة هذه الفرصة لي للحديث عن واقع العمل الإنساني في مجال مكافحة الألغام وعن دور منظمات المحلية في هذا القطاع الحيوي. نحن منظمة محلية تأسست في نهاية 22 على يد مجموعة من شباب وشابات الذين يمتلكون خبرات سابقة في مجال الأعمال المتعلقة بالألغام. جاء التأسيس استجابة لحاجة الملحة لوجود منظمات المحلية والدولية قادرة على التعامل مع حجم التلوث الكبير في سوريا نتيجة السنوات الطويلة من حرب والصراعات المتعددة. لقد أدت الحرب الأهلية وتعدد القوى المتصارعة داخل سوريا إلى انتشار واسع لمخلفات الحرب في معظم محافظات، مما جعل سوريا تصنف كواحدة من أخطر مناطق من حيث التلوث بالألغام. ونحن نؤكد هذه الحقيقة من خلال ما نشاهده يوميا من حوادث وإصابات، خاصة في مناطق الشرقية مثل رقة والدير الزور، حيث تقع حوادث بشكل شبه يومي. ويبرز هذا الخطر الواضح خلال موسم جمع الكمى، حيث يخرج المدنيون إلى البادية بحثا عن مصدر الرزق ليواجهوا خطر الألغام المنتشرة بكثافة، مما يؤدي إلى وقوع الضحايا بشكل متكرر. كما إن التغييرات المستمرة في مناطق السيطرة والصراع على النفوذ أدت إلى تلوث مناطق جديدة وزاد من حجم التدخلات العاجلة. فعلى سبيل المثال شهدنا مؤخرا حاجة ملحة للتدخل في ريف رقة شمالي وخاصة في مناطق عين عيسى وتل أبيض، حيث تنتشر الألغام في أكثر من 70 قرية، وأدت هذه المخاطر إلى وقوع حوادث بين الأطفال والنساء والرجال، خصوصا مع عودة الأهالي إلى قراهم وأراضيهم الزراعية. وهذا لا يهدد حياتهم فقط، بل يفاقم معاناتهم الاقتصادية نتيجة عدم قدرة على استثمار أراضيهم. كما إن التطورات الإقليمية بما في ذلك حرب لبنان أدت إلى موجات هجرة عكسية نحو الداخل السوري، وهي عودة غير آمنة في ظل وجود ألغام ومخلفات الحرب وغياب التدخلات السريعة التي تتيح للمنظمات الأخرى تقديم خدماتهم الأساسية سواء في التعليم أو قطاعات الخدمية الأخرى. فرغم هذا الواقع الصعب فإن منظمات المحلية مثل منظمتنا تواجه تحديات كبيرة أبرزها نقص التمويل المستدام، وكثيرا ما نضطر إلى إيقاف أنشطتنا قبل استكمالها بسبب انقطاع التمويل، مما يخلق فجوة بيننا وبين المجتمع الذي نخدمه ويؤثر سلبا على الثقة والاستمرارية. لقد واجهنا هذا التحدي بشكل مباشر خلال شراكتنا مع منظمة HI في دير الزور، حيث لم نتمكن من استكمال العمل في القرى السبعة بالدير الزور رغم الحاجة الكبيرة، وكذلك الأمر في مدينة دير الزور أيضا أخذنا منهم تمويل بس ما قدرنا نكمل بسبب نقص التمويل الحاد. كما إننا كمنظمة محلية لا نملك صناديق الطوارئ تتيح لنا استجابة سريعة في مناطق المتضررة رغم تلقي عديد من طلبات التدخل التي لا نستطيع تلبيتها بسبب محدودية الموارد. إضافة إلى ذلك فإن الوصول إلى كبار المانحين الذين يمكنهم توفير تمويل سريع ومرن لا يزال محدودا جدا. ومع ذلك تتميز المنظمات المحلية بقربها من المجتمع، مما يجعل تدخلها أكثر سلاسة وسرعة ومرونة وفعالية مقارنة مع منظمات الدولية التي تحتاج في كثير من الأحيان إلى وقت أطول للوصول والتدخل. ومن جانب آخر يؤثر نقص التمويل بشكل مباشر على كوادرنا، حيث يؤدي أحيانا إلى تأخر رواتب لعدة أشهر، مما ينعكس على استقرار الفريق ويزيد الفجوة والثقة مع المجتمع. كما نواجه صعوبات في حصول على التدريبات المتخصصة رغم الحديث المستمر عن أهمية البناء قدرات للمنظمات المحلية، ولكن ذلك ليس كاف على الأرض. ونعاني أيضا من استنزاف الكفاءات، حيث نفقد عديدا من الموظفين المؤهلين لصالح المنظمات الدولية بسبب الفجوة الكبيرة في الرواتب بين المنظمات المحلية والدولية وغياب تمويل طويل الأمد الذي يضمن استقرارهم. ورغم هذه التحديات كان لمنظمتنا تدخلات مهمة وفعالة. فعلى سبيل المثال في قرية المريعية بالريف دير الزور الشرقي اكتشفنا وجود قنابل عنقودية في المدارس مثل مدرسة رشيد الفرج حيث كان الأطفال في المدرسة ووجود ألغام أيضا في المدرسة، ومع أنه كانت ألغام عنقودية. وبالتنسيق مع منظمة HI تم إزالة الخطر بشكل عاجل. وكذلك الأمر في مدينة دير الزور في مدرسة سالم الدرويش في دير الزور، حيث تم التعامل مع خطر مماثل. هذه الأمثلة تعكس أهمية الشراكة بين المنظمات المحلية والدولية ومدى تأثيرها الإيجابي المباشر على حياة المدنيين. كما قمنا بالتعاون مع يونيسيف في قرية الجباجب لدعم عملية تعليمية من خلال إجراء مسح لمناطق المؤهلة لوضع خيم تعليمية. ونود أيضا لفت الانتباه إلى قضية خطيرة أخرى، وهي وجود مخلفات الحرب في نهر الفرات، مما يؤدي إلى كارثة بيئية مع مرور الوقت إذا لم يتم التعامل معها بشكل عاجل. في الختام، نؤمن بأن تمكين المنظمات المحلية هو حجر الأساس لبناء الاستجابة الإنسانية الفعالة ومستدامة، ونتطلع إلى تعزيز الشراكات وزيادة الدعم وعمل المشترك من أجل بناء مجتمع آمن خالي من ألغام ومخلفات الحرب، وضمان عودة آمنة وكريمة للسكان إلى مناطقهم. أشكركم جميعا على حسن استماعكم، ونتطلع إلى جهودكم وتعاونكم لتحقيق هذا الهدف النبيل. مع خالص مودتي والشكر لكم.
Thank you very much, Masoud. You indeed mentioned the very complicated work of national organization and also local organization facing the population and the communities without being able to address all their demands, which is extremely complicated, and also like the short-term funding affecting capacity strengthening of the staff and keeping the staff inside the national organization. So that's a very, very good point. You also mentioned Derezo, which is the most contaminated governorate, and other governorates where you intervene quite quickly with the funding that you had. So we can show that NGOs and local NGOs are also very agile and can actually, with the right funding, do something timely. So it's an interesting point as well. But I would like now to maybe hear the perspective of the National Mine Action Center. We have here Mohamed Rashid with us. I think in the last event yesterday, we spoke about what has changed before December 2024 and now. And I think something that has changed is actually that we have a very, very interesting and clear vision of the government. We have ministries' strategies. We have the National Agricultural Strategy, for instance. We have the Statement of Recovery Priorities for International Cooperation. We have the NOCAM Vision 2026-2027. So different visions and strategies from the government. So I think it could be very interesting if Mohamed Rashid, you could briefly explain like how the sector has evolved in your perspective since December 2024, and what the most pressing needs and challenges are from the perspective of National Mine Action Center for the recovery of Syria.
شكرا لكم وشكرا على إتاحة الفرصة، ونشكر GICHD على المؤتمر. طبعا جميع نحن متفقين على لا يمكن الحديث عن تعافي آمن من دون معالجة المخاطر. هذا شيء واضح. هذه المخاطر ما بتهدد فقط المدنيين، بل تمنع الوصول إلى الخدمات كما ذكرتم، الأراضي الزراعية وفتح الطرقات والمدارس وعودة السكان. أكيد التحدي الأساسي هو التمويل القصير، والجميع نوه على هذه النقطة. التمويل القصير نحن نتفهم أنه هو غير كافي وغير متناسب مع المشكلة التي يوجد لمعالجتها، بل بحاجة إلى سنوات للعمل عليها. لذلك نحن نحتاج أنه ننتقل من مشاريع القصيرة إلى دعم متعدد السنوات، وهذا بيعزز مع القيادة الوطنية. طبعا يكون مبني على القيادة الوطنية والأولويات والنظام الأولويات الوطني، وخطة المخاطر والاحتياجات، ونربط هاي الإزالة وعمليات الإزالة بإعادة إعمار وعودة السكان. الله من جانبنا نحن بنعمل على تعزيز وبندعم على تعزيز القيادة الوطنية بتوحيد البيانات أولاً، وهي ربط الألغام كاملة بخطط تعافي وإعادة أعمار. فلذلك نحن جميع العاملين بهذا الملف بهذا المجال في أراضي السورية عرفنا التحدي وعرفنا المشاريع قصيرة الأمل هي الغير كافية ولا يتناسب المشكلة. لذلك نحن نعزز بتوحيد جهود والتنسيق بين جميع العاملين بهذا المجال بخطة وطنية وتحت قيادة وطنية. فنحن ندفش ونعزز هي الاستراتيجية. الاستثمارات يعني رسالتنا هي الاستثمار في النظام الوطني هو الطريق لتحقيق أثر مستدام وآمن للمجتمعات السورية. دعم عمليات في المناطق الأولويات هي عودة السكان، الزراعة، البنية التحتية. نحن لا نحتاج فقط تمويلا لمشاريع منفصلة، نحن نأكد على هذه النقطة كمان. المشاريع المنفصلة كمان هو مو حاجتنا، أو الحاجة الأساسية دعمنا متعدد سنوات لبناء النظام وطني مستدام. فرسالتنا يعني هو أنه كل أرض آمن تعني عودة عائلة تستطيع العودة، ومزارع يستطيع العمل، ومجتمع يستطيع التعافي. لذلك الاعتماد على الخطة الوطنية وتعزيز دعم الخطة الوطنية وإدراج القيادة الوطنية تحت بتنسيق جميع العاملين في هذا المجال، فهذا بيعزز إلى التعافي آمن في المستقبل.
Thank you very much, Mohamed Rashid. You did speak about no recovery without addressing the risks, and that's mainly the problem that we have in Syria right now. You also mentioned the short-term funding, the funding gaps, but you mentioned something very interesting as well, that the time needed. Like, this is what I was saying at the beginning, like, we need time to build the capacity, and we need time to identify the priorities, we need time and multi-year support based to be able to have a national leadership that is actually coordinating all this. You touch on the coordination as well, mentioning that we need a strong coordination in the sector, which I agree totally with this. We need a standardized sector with like standards, which is extremely important as well. And that, again, takes time. And you also mentioned that you don't want individual projects. You want all this mine action sector to be embedded into a national plan and nationally led. And this is exactly what we are supposed to do all together. I think one of the very impactful sentences that you mentioned is like every cleared land means returns on the family, for the family. So I think that's very important. It's actually this. It's about communities. It's about individuals returning to their safe lands and being able to restart their lives. It's very interesting to hear the authorities' perspective, and good to hear that the National Mine Action Center is also engaging with so many different relevant actors. I know they're engaging with UNMAS, with the national NGOs, but also international NGOs here. And I think what we can conclude here is that mine action should be embedded within the broader humanitarian and development strategies and efforts. Predictable and long-term funding can support recovery efforts, and we need to implement through a very strong and robust coordination with the full range of actors in this sector right now. So I will stop here, and I will open the floor to the audience in case anyone has a question. Aida, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is Aida Burnett Cargill, Syria Mine Action AOR co-coordinator. I don't have a question. I just have one more remark onto the consequences of short-term funding on both the ability of partners to implement. What we fairly rarely mention is the fact as well that the partners in the field have worked for many, many years to gain the trust of the communities, and especially the national partners. Every time we lose funding and we cannot respond when the communities call us, this trust erodes significantly. And we see that also every day in the field. And I think the consequences are especially also quite grave for the national partners who are from the communities, as are also the colleagues who are working also for the international organizations, but much more the national. That's also something that I think needs to be taken into consideration when taking into account short-term funding. That's over from my end.
Thank you, Aida. I totally agree with this. Is there any other question from the audience today? تفضل.
شكرا جزيلا على الإيضاح. بالفعل هو ملف هام نحن عم نحكي فيه. هو الدعم القصير الأمد، أو خلينا نحكي من البداية، حجم التلوث الموجود بسوريا هو ما بيبطئ التنمية، هو موقف التنمية بسوريا نهائيا. لهيك نحن بدنا نحكي إنه حل مشكلة التلوث بسوريا هو طويل الأمد، ونحن عم نحكي بمشاكل وحلول لنحلها هي قصيرة الأمد، وطول حياتها هي إنه الحلول القصيرة الأمد ما بتبني أي شيء بالمشاكل الطويلة الأمد. أنا مع إنه نحن نحافظ على موضوع الدعم للمنظمات وللجمعيات بالاستدامة بالعمل. الصراحة إنه لما بيكون توقف موضوع الإمداد أو المشاريع، فأحياناً عم يضطروا المنظمات لأنه يرجعوا للصفر، وهذا خطير جداً، لأنه هن بيعدوا فترة بيفقدوا الموظفين لهم مثل ما ذكر السيد جو، وبيرجعوا بدي يستقطبوا موظفين جديدة. هذا المشكلة عم تعمل إنه مشاكل، أو نحن عم نسعى لنحل مشاكل قصيرة الأمد، وعم تصير عائق للمشاكل اللي بسوريا بشكل عام طويلة الأمد. فأنا برأيي نحن نقترح يعني حل مشكلة هو إنه يكون في المستقبل نحن ندرس تعاون مشترك مع الجمعيات المحلية العاملة بسوريا، يعني إنه يكون في توافق بين المركز الوطني مع الجمعيات في حال إنه تم قطع الإمداد، يعني يكون في هون المركز الوطني مع الدولة يتدخل بمتابعة العمل، نحن مشان نحافظ على الاستمرارية لنحل مشكلة طويلة الأمد. وشكرا لكم.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fadi. It's a solution that it's interesting because eventually local actors are the ones that will be leading the mine action sector eventually, and this is how it should be. So thank you for highlighting this good collaboration that can be strengthened between the National Mine Action Center and the national NGOs. I will open the floor again in case anyone has a question.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Beatrice from GSHD, Policy Research Program. I had a question, maybe mostly for DRC. We were talking about the importance of funding and how short-term funding is a major problem. Let's say, looking in a medium-term perspective, we know that one of the key elements to build trust with donors is strong data that can also capture the relevance of mine action for outcomes and impact. At the same time, it's a negative cycle because to collect those data, we also need funding. So given the work of DRC, I was wondering whether you have experience of integrating data that are more relevant to the development sector, let's say, with mine action data in Syria.
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. If I understood you correctly, the question is whether we have sort of used proxy data from other sectors in order to prioritize mine action and to showcase the relevance of mine action, right, to donors.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you. I think what we're doing is in DRC, and I think other organizations also do that, but we do this across basically our core sectors: protection, economic recovery, shelter, wash, and mine action. We do multi-sectoral needs assessments. And in some cases, it's not always possible to capture data for mine action because communities, we have been working in very rural areas where you have people who don't have a lot of knowledge about the areas that they are now in, because there are people who basically, were displaced and they came back to an area that they're not familiar with. And in some cases, it was not able to collect data on mine action because it just takes a bit longer. Obviously, to catch perceptions on safety is a bit easier than obviously to do proper survey, right? So survey is something that just takes time and needs to be part of the project. This is not something that we can do for free, just like that, in order to basically obviously draft an advocacy piece or a proposal for a donor potentially. So to answer your question, we have used data from other sectors that touch upon basically the overall perception of safety, access to services, questions around basically community resilience. Our protection program is basically collecting that kind of data, and we're also circulating basically our protection monitoring data quite widely in the relevant sectors, where you don't capture obviously the essence of mine action, but you have a lot of proxy basically questions and indicators that can give us an understanding on how we could prioritize mine action, and this also would help us then basically to also highlight the relevance for mine action. However, I really want to stress again, NTS, this is what is the key, right? So, and NTS is something that we all cannot just do just like that, to do a needs assessment, which is I think much easier for like protection or other teams. Protection people, don't be mad at me, but NTS is the key. This is where we understand the socioeconomic impact of contamination, the type and scale of contamination, and this is what allows us to prioritize and really make a strong case for mine action to donors, to communities, to engage our communities, to build trust with communities. So yes, to answer your question, we do it both ways, but NTS needs to be always sort of like the core of basically mine action and integration, in my opinion.
Yeah. Aida, the floor is yours.
No, I just wanted to continue just a little bit and additional information on the multi-sector needs assessment and whether we use the data. So in the Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, all the sectors are pitching into their questions into the multi-sector needs assessment. And there are specific data that we from Mine Action have asked to add into the multi-sector needs assessment, especially when it comes to water and sanitation, food security, education, shelter, etc., etc. And I think the issue has also become a little bit, it literally comes to translation of some of the things, because some of the basic questions that are asked for mine action do not really translate into proper results, because they are often misunderstood, or the term explosive ordnance or bombs are translated in a wrong way from English into Arabic and vice versa. So there is a lot of use. So what you see in, for example, documents like HNRP, Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, there are those things integrated, and what the final outcome is a multi sort of sectorial needs for the country. Those kinds of questions are integrated, but again, I reiterate what Jakub was saying. The only way to know and find out the needs is really through non-technical surveys and having people on the ground.
Yeah, but I think that this multi-sectoral approach and this area-based approach we talked about a little bit today is very critical and instrumental. And maybe I have a question for Daniela, just because I know that DRC is integrating protection, economic recovery, wash and shelter, infrastructure rehabilitation with humanitarian disarmament and peace building, but also HI has some integrated area-based programming examples that have worked before. So I think it would be great, Daniela, if you could give an example of something that worked and show really like the cost effectiveness also of that area-based approach and integrated multi-sectoral approach.
Yeah, I think, thank you very much for the question. I think that, one integrated approach that works quite well is when we bring the mine action component together with the health component and the livelihood component / agriculture specifically. I mean, in Syria, we are quite new at that. We have other examples for the region, but we are bringing it in Hama. So we have started a couple of months ago fully after the prep phase, in which basically we are bringing in HI as a mine action actor, but also health actor to provide services for survivors. And then we are in a consortium with livelihood actors that will bring the agricultural side. So the cycle will be quite simple in a way, straightforward. So there will be a prioritization of contaminated land in the area in which HI will intervene with survey and land release, and the agricultural actor will support the communities to restart actually agricultural activities in the area. And of course, aside of that, but as a complement of that, HI will also provide services, health services for the survivors and victim assistance for the ones that were actually, unfortunately, victims before we could intervene in the area. So this is an example of, it's still at very beginning, so I cannot showcase specific impact so far, but hopefully we will be able to in coming months. Thank you.
Great, thanks. There is another question here, Sebastian.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. No, just not to overload NTS. I think NTS has a very specific purpose. We want to identify hazardous areas as precise as possible, etc. So what we in MAC do, Sebastian Kazak MAC, we have pre and post clearance impact assessments. And they are done at the best is when you actually started clearance, and then people will really trust you and give you all the information you need. But we need to be good in these pre-post clearance impact assessments. Group interviews do the job. Within an hour, you have most of the information you really need. Yeah? And then we can add some household surveys, but more at a really randomly selected, and so to get some more in-depth data. But you can get the basic data within an hour and a half. Thanks.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for that comment. I just wanted to basically stress, I think, the way we say basically CNTS at DRC is it is the core to prioritize and to first identify community needs with a very strong community engagement component, and then to prioritize not only mine action but also other recovery sectors, right? Because we do collect obviously information about demographics, vulnerabilities, access to schools, roads, that kind of stuff. So this obviously helps us basically to then sort of like do the first step, choose a task, and then we will also obviously do the pre and post impact assessments. But sort of like NTS, in our case at least, we see it sort of like as the core sort of like enabler to like together with community liaison to sort of like really, collect a robust basis of data for mine action and for nexus activities. But I do agree with you that the pre and post assessments are very important. Yeah.
So I think we need to conclude this event. Maybe I will leave the floor to Mohamed Rashid to give the last words, and then we will be concluding again.
شكرا مرة ثانية. بالأخير نحن كالسلطة الوطنية والمركز الوطني نرى أنه العاملين بالمجال الألغام في سوريا قدموا وعم بيقدموا شيء مهم وعم بيحاولوا يغطوا جميع أراضي سورية، ولكن نحن نرجع نعيد حسابات صغيرة كأرقام اللي نحن عم نعرضها عادة. فهي الأرقام بحاجة كمان تنسيق الجميع مع بعض تحت سلطة وطنية. برجع بركز لكي نكون دقيقين بهي العمليات اللي عم تتم على أراضي سورية. فكل ما كان العمليات دقيقة تحت قيادة وطنية وسلطة وطنية وموحدة مع جميع الأطراف، فبيكون التأثير من خلال هذا الدعم اللي عم بيجي ومن خلال العاملين بجغرافية سوريا بيكون له تأثير قوي وفعال. بتشكر الجميع. شكرا.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So there are hopes in Syria. There are also a lot of expectation at the moment, and we need to work together to meet the needs of millions of people who want to return safely in their land. Thank you so much. See you soon.